Hi again, I'm Karen Tomkins and I'm back for another tall tale of Wexford. Thank you so much to all of you who got in touch with Wexford Libraries over the last few weeks to give me some details that I was looking for about you, about where you live in Wexford. So many interesting ones. See if you can hear yourself and recognise some of those details in this week's story. And by the way, if you'd like to get in touch for future stories, you can do so by emailing libraryhq@wexfordcoco.ie, or you can check out the details on the Wexford Libraries Facebook and website page as well. So this week's story is called The Ghost Ship of Rosslare Harbour. Now don't be scared if you're frightened of ghosts. He's a nice ghost and it's a nice ship. But it's also about some buried treasure somewhere along the coast in County Wexford. Maybe you're familiar with this story. Maybe you found some treasure. One thing you'll need if you are to ever go digging for treasure is this thing, a map. Now this is quite an old map and it's a map of the world. But in this story, it's just a map of a particular place in County Wexford. Have a listen. Maybe you've been there before. And maybe that thing that you saw twinkling in the sand was more than just sunshine. Enjoy The Ghost Ship of Rosslare Harbour. Is it a tall tale or is it fact? Well, you can decide. See you next time.
The Ghost Ship of Rosslare Harbour. Good night, Frannick. Now get some sleep. You have school in the morning. I will. Good night, Mom, replied 10-year-old Frannick Kelly, who had absolutely no intention of going asleep that Sunday night. He knew he had school tomorrow, and he knew he had a big 4th class history project due next week that he'd have to work really hard on. What would he even do his history project on? Frannick wasn't a big fan of history, or school, or anything these days. Since his granddad had died a few months ago, he'd lost interest in many things. How he had loved spending time with Grandad, listening to his stories all about Wexford years ago. Grandad was a great man for the stories. In fact, sometimes Frannick wondered if he was making them all up, like the old framed map on the wall in the sitting room. Grandad told him it had been in the family for generations, that it was a treasure map. Frannick pretended to believe him, but really, he thought his granddad had probably cut the map out of a magazine or something and just hung it on the wall to have another tall tale to tell him. However, tonight, Frannick had a bit of a tall tale of his own. Something was afoot, not an actual foot. That means that something was going on that was a little bit unusual. It was happening lately every night down at the harbour. For the last few nights, as Frannick had drifted off to sleep, he had heard an old ship horn. Nothing out of the ordinary if you live in Rosslare Harbour, you might say. Only Frannick knew the sound of all the ferries coming and going, and this one was very different. As he lay in bed, he heard his mam switch off the plugs and lights downstairs, and he waited, and waited, and then, just like clockwork, there it was again. Tonight was the night Frannick had planned to sneak down to the harbour to catch a better look and see for himself what was making this noise. And so he crept out of his bed, climbed down the drain outside his bedroom window, and off he set bravely to the water's edge with his torch and his toy lightsaber. Well, you never know when you're going to need that. Most of the freight ships and ferries had docked, and things were very quiet. But as Frannick hid behind a wall, he could hear the sound of that old ship horn again, and it was growing louder and louder. The clear night sky became quite clouded, and a mist descended on the water, and there, breaking through the lapping waves, the most magnificent tall ship came into sight. Frannick couldn't believe his eyes. It was like one of those old sailing ships from the pirate movies. It even had white masts flapping in the wind. One of them had the ship's name on it, the Earl of Sandwich. And as Frannick leaned forward to get a better look, he froze to the spot. Staring right back at him from behind the ship's wheel was a man, dressed in a very old-fashioned captain's outfit. Cream breeches, they're basically trousers just past your knee, black knee boots, a crimson waistcoat and a tailored navy coat with gold lapels and shiny gold buttons. He was the real deal, all right, just like one of the pirates from the movies, and he even had a hat in a triangle shape and a mini telescope held up to his eye that he was staring at Frannick through. Staring at Frannick through? That meant he could see him. Uh-oh. What was Frantic going to do? Before he had a chance to make up his mind, the pirate was beckoning Frantic right down to the pier, where the Earl of Sandwich ship was now moored. Can nobody else see this? Frantic was intrigued, terrified, and yet he wasn't afraid of the pirate. His face had looked kind, as though he needed Frantic's help somehow. He tiptoed down the pier and walked aboard the ship. "I've seen you," said the pirate. "Aye, in 300 years, you're the only soul I've looked at through these lenses who has seen me back." Frantic was kind of expecting a load of "Ooh, me hearties," but this man was well-spoken and Scottish. "My name is Captain George Glass. My family and I were travelling on board this ship from the Canary Islands to London when the crew staged a mutiny." Frantic had heard of mutinies, all right. Turns out Captain Glass and his family were passengers on the ship, and the real captain, Captain Cochrane, had agreed to give them a lift. But the crew on board soon realised that in their suitcases were more than just their pyjamas and their toothbrushes. The Glass family were carrying a fortune back from Tenerife, €12 million worth of Spanish gold dollars, silver pieces of 8, bags of gold dust, and precious jewels to be exact. Fed up working hard and getting nowhere, 4 of the sailors on board wanted that treasure for themselves. And back in 1765, just off the coast of Wexford, they tried to sink the ship and everyone on it. But not before taking off in another boat with all of Captain Glass's treasure. They foolishly thought that nobody would suspect a thing, and simply believed that the Sandwich had got caught in a storm and sunk to the bottom of the ocean. They managed to bury what they could of the treasure. But the Sandwich didn't sink, and the 4 crew members were caught. Nobody knows how much of the treasure is still there. "But why do you steer the ship in these waters?" asked Frantic. "And if this is a ghost ship, where are your family?" "They're at rest, my boy. But my old sea captain's heart won't rest until I get that treasure back. You better go, I've said enough," said Captain Glass abruptly. Frantic was very tired at school the next day. By history lesson, he was ready to nod off. "Don't forget, next week I want you all to present your project about Wexford history to me and your classmates," said his teacher, Mr. Doyle. "See you tomorrow." Frantic visited old Captain Glass every night that week. He'd board the Sandwich and they'd share dried beef and sea biscuits and boiled orange juice. I'll be honest, it tasted disgusting, but Frantic was too polite to say anything. "Captain Glass, can I ask you something? Why have you not been able to get the treasure back? Was it gone when you went to look for it?" "Gone? Aye. I've never found it. I don't know where it is. But I do believe the treasure map leading to it washed up here in Rosslare Harbour all those years ago. And I'm staying here till I find it." "Really? A treasure map? Well, why didn't you say? Captain Glass, I think I can help you. I'll be back tomorrow night." Maybe Grandad had been right. Captain Glass's eyes lit up the following night as Frantic handed him the framed map he had quietly taken from his sitting room. With his hands shaking, tears trickled down the captain's cheeks. "This is what I've been waiting for. Dollar Bay. Of course that's where they went." "Aye. All right, Frantic. First mate, you're joining my crew tonight. Charter course 20 nautical miles at 10 knots south by southeast. We'll travel north of Hook Head. There's good anchorage there for the Sandwich, and the winds are strengthening. We better move fast, Frantic." For the first time in almost 300 years, the ghost ship sailed out of Rosslare Harbour with Frantic and Captain Glass at the helm. They reached the shores of Dollar Bay by first light. And there was no doubt that this was the site of the buried treasure, for in the sunlight, Frantic and Captain Glass could already see twinkling on the sand. They dug deeper and deeper, until at last their spades hit the buried treasure chest. And indeed, the key in Captain Glass's pocket still worked, and inside the chest were the pieces of gold, the silver pieces of 8, and thousands of jewels. "Thank you, Frantic. This is the end of my journey," said the captain. "I have found what I was looking for. I'll return now to my family, and the Sandwich will sail no more. You've been a great friend to this old sea captain, Frantic. Your grandad was right about that map. This is for you," he said, handing the young boy one of the pieces of 8 and the map. Captain Glass loaded the treasure on board the Sandwich and sailed off into the horizon. But with every wave, the ghost ship sank further down into the water, never to be seen again. Frannick managed to row back in a little rowing boat to Rosslare just in time for school and his history project. He stood at the top of his class, confidently telling the story of Dollar Bay and the mutiny on board the Earl of Sandwich. Top marks, Frannick. I can tell you worked very hard researching this project. It's great to see you back to your old self again. Gosh, the way you speak of him, it's almost like you know this Captain Glass, said his teacher, Mr. Doyle. And tell me, Frannick, did they ever find the buried treasure, or even the map to it? You wouldn't believe me if I told you, Mr. Doyle. It's all a bit of a tall tale, smiled Frannick, as he squeezed the treasure's silver coin in the palm of his hand.